Campaign report, first on BBC One with Peter Sissons.
The Tories of Tatton are meeting now to decide whether they'll have Neil Hamilton as their candidate. The former minister faced his party activists after earlier coming eyeball to eyeball with Martin Bell. The TV reporter pledged to fight him if he doesn't stand down. Church leaders lay into politicians of all parties for failing to offer real hope to those in greatest need. And sweeping new rules for the meat industry are on the way in response to the E. coli poisonings. Good evening. Conservative Party activists in the Cheshire constituency of Tatton are meeting now to decide the fate of Neil Hamilton, their former MP, who's been dogged by but always denied allegations that he took cash to ask questions in Parliament. Mr Hamilton faces the certainty that if selected as the official Conservative candidate, he'll be opposed by the anti-corruption candidate Martin Bell, given a clear run by Labour and the Liberal Democrats. Earlier today, Mr Hamilton sought out Mr Bell for a dramatic face-to-face. Our political correspondent Nicholas Jones is in the Tatton constituency.
Come on, let him come through, please. Decorum.
Neil Hamilton was stony-faced for the meeting that will decide his political future. The expectations of a tense occasion had been building up all evening, but Mr Hamilton's supporters were out in force.
I support him. I said if he's telling lies through his teeth, then he's the best actor I've ever met.
And Mr Hamilton also had a celebrity friend to back him, local Coronation Street star Bill Roach. But the real high spot came earlier in the day on Knutsford Common. Neil Hamilton and his wife Christine were determined to upstage the TV journalist who'd invaded their constituency.
Why have you come here today? I'm going to ask Mr Bell a question.
And Martin Bell arrived without any further prompting.
You know Mr Hamilton's here.
No, it's fine. Where is he?
And then, in his white suit suggesting trust and integrity, off he strode to meet them, promising a fair fight.
I really want this to be a sort of a decent, free, dignified campaign. Good. So that when it's over, we can just shake hands and walk away. I congratulate you all, commiserate with you, and you do the same with me. Good.
But it was Mr Hamilton who'd sought the confrontation and struck first.
I've only come along this morning to ask one question, really, because you're presenting yourself in the Tatton constituency, which I've represented for 14 years as an anti-corruption candidate. And the irresistible inference which is to be drawn from that is that you think I'm guilty in some shape or form of corruption. And so I'd really like to know from you what allegations of corruption you think I'm guilty of.
I'll give you my answer. I don't actually intend to talk about you at all people are going to ask me about you. I want you to run on your record or against your record, whatever it is. I want a clear election. I may talk about trust. I think the issue of trust is important. And if at the end of their day the electors of Tatton feel they can trust you more than they can trust me, then my goodness, they should elect you. That's reasonable, isn't it?
But, I mean, you must admit that the tendentious title that you've chosen for your candidature as being anti-corruption and the selection of this particular constituency, which is now indelibly connected with me,
I haven't chosen.
It must draw.
I have not
the
chosen this title. I'm going to stand as an independent, and I'm going to lay out my stall on a lot of issues. Because if I'm expecting people to vote for me, they've got to know where I stand on things like education and Europe and so on. And I would do that after nomination, if assuming you're going to make it tonight, and I'm just...
Of course he's going to make it tonight.
Now it was the turn of Mrs Hamilton to stand up for her husband.
Do you accept that a man is innocent unless proved guilty?
Yes, of course I do.
So you accept that my husband is innocent?
I think there's a lot of...
Do you accept that my husband is innocent?
I'm not facing an ambush here. Let's just see what comes out. I don't know. I don't know. I'm standing here because a lot of local people have asked me to stand here, and the impetus comes from local people. And let them just choose between us.
I thought it came from a dinner party.
I would just like to say then that you are prepared to give me the benefit of the doubt on the allegations that have been made against
Absolutely,
me.
Absolutely.
Good.
So the Hamiltons got one significant concession.
There we are. I don't want to hijack the whole press conference.
Well, you haven't done bad. I'm supposed to be the guy who manipulates the media. Well done.
So, ambush accomplished, the Hamiltons departed. Martin Bell prepared for a walkabout with Colonel Bob Stewart, a friend from his days in Bosnia, and he's relishing by the hour the chance to fight it all the way to polling day.
Since we went on the air, Neil Hamilton's adoption meeting has ended, and he has been re-adopted as the Conservative candidate in Tatton. Nicholas Jones joins us from there now. Nick, what can you tell us?
Well, it's a resounding victory for Neil Hamilton, 2-1 at least. The figures that we've been given so far are 182 in favour of reselecting Neil Hamilton and 100 against him. There were only 50 people who put up their hands initially to try to get a secret ballot, so it went through on a show of hands, and Mr. Hamilton then spoke to the meeting, and as you can see, the people are just leaving now.
It's still a significant split in the local party, Nick. What effect would you expect that split to have during the campaign?
Well, I think you're right. There is a significant split, and more details of it have been emerging during the day, with a number of local councillors, including a number on Macclesfield Borough Council, indicating that they are thinking of standing down, of resigning in protest. It was part of the pressure that was on Mr. Hamilton initially, but now it looks as though they are going to go ahead with their threat.
So Martin Bell gets a run at Neil Hamilton, and presumably it's the last thing the Tory party leadership nationally wants.
That, I think, is the case, yes. It keeps the whole question of the anti-corruption argument right up in the news. Martin Bell himself, he seems to be relishing the chance, almost as though he's fancying his prospects of becoming a Member of Parliament. He's certainly been parading himself up here very much as an independent, someone who he believes the people can trust.
Nicholas Jones in Tatton, thank you. Church leaders have accused the political parties of ignoring the poor in the election campaign and giving priority to the well-off. A report on unemployment and poverty from the Council of Churches for Britain and Ireland says the parties are more concerned with keeping taxes low than helping the jobless. Our political editor, Robin Oakley, reports.
At evening service in Westminster Cathedral tonight, they were concentrating on the power of prayer. But church leaders today nudged their way more directly into the election. The Council of Churches for Britain and Ireland, supported by all 11 main Christian denominations, produced a report chiding all the parties for focusing too much on tax cuts and too little on the unemployed and the have-nots of society. The report's authors declare, when so many are living in poverty and unemployment, it's wrong to give priority to the claims of those who are already well off. Among the main recommendations of the Council of Churches report are calls for higher taxes to fund job creation schemes, a national minimum wage, limits on high salaries, and less means testing for people applying for welfare benefits.
What this report is talking about is a major scale over 10 years of fresh priorities, that we are determined that it is possible to get rid of long-term unemployment, that it is possible that there should be enough good jobs for all. Good underlined, good jobs, not any old job will do.
Many church bodies have been practicing what they preach, backing centres like this one in St Helens, where people are taught keyboard skills to help them into jobs and to end what the report calls their social exclusion.
The Lord be with you.
The Council of Churches complains that none of the party's programmes offers enough hope. Church leaders have regularly caused controversy in recent years with their incursions into the political arena. If they don't speak out on social issues, they're accused of failing to give a moral lead. If they do, they're accused of meddling in politics. But in mid-election, the politicians have been careful not to give offence with their responses. All took what they wanted from the report. The Prime Minister, who'd opened his election campaign by promising to turn more have-nots into haves, welcomed the call for more wealth sharing, but rejected the report's solutions.
I invite them to go and look at the country that follows the prescriptions that they set out. Countries like France, countries like Germany, countries like Spain, countries like Italy, and then set out what the levels of youth unemployment are in those countries. And they will find in youth unemployment In the case of some of those countries, they're twice or 3 times as high as here.
Labour claimed the report endorsed their minimum wage proposals. The Shadow Chancellor rejected the call for more taxation, but used it to back the case for his party's Welfare into Work programme, to be paid for by the windfall tax on privatised utilities.
Like the churches, we believe long-term unemployment requires special additional measures. That is why we will create incentives for every long-term unemployed man and woman over 2 years unemployed to get them back to work.
But it was the Liberal Democrats who were entitled to crow. Like the churches, they'd attacked the fatalism of the other parties. They are promising more tax for high earners, less tax for low earners, and a penny on income tax to fund more education. They responded to criticisms that even that didn't go far enough.
If you're saying is there further to go, yes there is. But I think the Liberal Democrats have made a serious start. We're the only party who's had the guts to say that yes, we should be raising tax on those earning over £100,000. And we should distribute that so as to lift 500,000 people out of tax altogether.
The Church's intervention has been a reminder this election so far has been about reassuring the haves that they stand no risk of having a little less. It's shown the politicians the election isn't just about the handful of swing voters in key marginal seats, but about fundamental questions which they neglect at their peril. Robin Oakley, BBC News, Westminster.
And later in the news, we have a special report on poverty and the welfare state in Britain. The Prime Minister has promised tax concessions worth £800 million to small companies. The Conservatives say their main proposal to reform the uniform business rate will benefit more than 750,000 small firms. The Federation of Small Businesses said 200,000 firms have gone bust because of high business rates. This report from our business correspondent, Greg Wood.
John Major touring the Royal Worcester China factory. Big businesses pay on average half the rates per square foot that small businesses do. Today the Prime Minister said that a future Conservative government would introduce a new rates allowance to cut the bill for small firms. Large firms would pick up the tab.
Over 750,000 small businesses will benefit. That's 90% of small firms with turnover below £100,000. 140,000, as a result of this, will pay no rates at all.
The present method of calculating the business rate discriminates against small businesses, particularly shops. The shop is split into zones, each 20 feet deep. The zone nearest the street is taxed at the highest rate, and the second zone at half that rate. Many small shops fall within these two zones. But a next-door supermarket will be much deeper, so it'll be split into more zones, each taxed at a lower rate than the zone in front. The effect is that the average rate per square foot paid by the supermarket is lower than the rate paid by the small shop. The Conservatives are trying to appeal to people like optician Paul Curran. He pays rates of £4,000 a year. Under today's proposals, that would come down by £120.
If they were seriously interested in helping small businesses, they've known about this lot since 1989. Why wait till 3 weeks before an election to suddenly decide they're going to help us? It's nothing to do with helping us, it's electioneering.
Labour said the Conservatives were spraying around spending promises.
They say that big business will have to pay for the tax cut for small business. Well, they'd better now tell us who will pay, how much they will pay, where the figures are and whether they add up.
This is another gimmick. I mean, quite clearly a tapered business rate is better than the existing system. But what small businesses really want is to see UBR abolished and replaced with a fairer local rating system.
Paul Curran, though, would not be happy to see the local authority setting his rates again, as both Labour and the Liberal Democrats want.
Well, talk about being between a rock and a hard place. If the local authorities are going to be totally in charge, if you've got a high-spending local authority, they are going to salt the small businesses again. There isn't really going to be any advantage for me from one to the other.
Labour's attempts to woo the business community reach their climax later this week when it publishes its business manifesto. Today's preemptive strike by the Conservatives is designed to put clear distance between the two parties in this key area of policy. Greg Wood, BBC News.
That's the news from the campaign trail for the moment. There'll be more later in the programme. But now, the rest of the day's news. The report into 2 outbreaks of E. coli food poisoning that killed the state. But first, over to Anne Perkins at our Westminster campaign desk for her nightly election roundup.
Evening, Peter. Tonight, the Liberal Democrat leader Paddy Ashdown has used his biggest speech of the campaign so far to attack Tony Blair. He condemned Labour for what he called their cosy complicity with the Tories in concentrating their message on middle-class voters in marginal seats, and he accused them of turning their backs on the poor.
With as much razzmatazz as the Liberal Democrats could muster, Paddy Ashdown was welcomed by the party faithful for this, his most important speech since the manifesto launch. He was blistering in his attack of John Major's Britain, riddled, he said, with discord and division. And on Tony Blair, he's rarely been as scathing, accusing him of spending every waking moment concentrating on ad men and spin doctors rather than the long-term needs of the country.
This election campaign is shamed thus far by the cosy complicity of Labour and Conservatives to turn their backs when confronted by the long term.
Mr. Ashdown described it as Tweedledum and Tweedledee politics, more to do with chasing 70,000 votes in key constituencies.
70,000 voters out of 56 million people. What an indictment of our electoral and our political system.
Momentum is what all political parties search for in election campaigns. So far, the Liberal Democrats have not found it. They remain stuck at around 11 or 12% in the polls, and what will worry party strategists is that that's after the manifesto launch and halfway through this campaign. Matthew Emery-Waller, BBC News, Central London.
Today it was the turn of the Welsh Nationalist Party, Plaid Cymru, to publish its manifesto. Its leader, Dafydd Wigley, said a vote for Plaid was the only way to put Wales on the political agenda. On the Constitution, the party promises an elected Welsh Parliament with tax-raising powers, followed by a referendum on full independence within the European Union. On the economy, Plaid Cymru pledges to create 100,000 new jobs with a new public works programme and to introduce a minimum wage of £4 an hour. The party would put up the standard rate of tax by twopence to raise money for health and education, and state pensions would be increased by restoring the link with average earnings. This report from our Wales political editor, Glyn Mathias.
Plaid Cymru are most identified by their campaign for what they call a powerhouse parliament for Wales as a step on the road to self-government. But they're also setting out what they see as a radical and socialist programme to improve public services and create 100,000 new jobs. They say they're the inheritors of the tradition which Labour has abandoned. But it would have to be paid for by a range of higher taxes, including 2p on the standard rate of income tax. Would the Welsh be prepared to pay higher taxes than the English?
You can't improve health, you can't improve social services, improve education, without putting resources in. You can't safeguard those teaching jobs without paying for the extra teachers. And it is totally dishonest for the Labour Party and the Conservative Party alike to pretend that you can do these things without having the additional resources. We see that those resources are needed. We are willing to put that bill before the people of Wales.
The population of Sandmarsh. The Shadow Welsh Secretary Ron Davies had some wildlife in his sights, hoping perhaps that nationalists will soon become an endangered species. He said Plaid Cymru's plans would destroy, not create jobs.
It's a blueprint for a fool's paradise. The centrepiece of it, as I understand, is a commitment to raise the level of taxation on people in Wales above that of people living across the Dee or across the Severn. And that really is just economic illiteracy.
Plaid Cymru's strength is in the rural areas of North and West Wales. They secured 4 seats at the last election on just 9% of the vote, and they've so far struggled to make much headway in the industrial areas of South Wales. The Liberal Democrats argued the people don't want independence.
We see the future for Wales, a powerful Wales in a powerful Britain. We don't want to see Wales sawn off at the Severn Bridge, and I think the people of Wales don't want that either.
It would appear to be leading us into cloud cuckoo land, the cloud cuckoo land that Plaid Cymru already live in. At least they're honest about breaking up the United Kingdom. They're more honest than the other two left-wing parties in Wales.
Plaid Cymru are hoping that by calling themselves socialist and carving out a distinctive position on the left, they'll succeed in attracting traditional Labour voters disillusioned with Tony Blair. But Labour say there's little sign of that happening. Glenn Mathias, BBC News, Cardiff.
Though yesterday an NOP opinion poll for Reuters suggested Labour was at 51%, a 21% lead over the Conservatives, a poll tonight from ICM for tomorrow's Guardian suggests the Conservatives have edged up slightly, narrowing Labour's lead to 12%. ICM suggests Labour are on 46%, down 2 on ICM's last poll at the weekend. The Conservatives are on 34%, up 1, and the Liberal Democrats are on 15, also up 1. The poll was carried out on Sunday and Monday. ICM's adjusted figures consistently suggest Labour's lead is narrower than it is in the other polls. The Socialist Labour Party, founded and led by the mine workers' president Arthur Scargill, has published its manifesto. The party plans to field 65 candidates and claims it has 8,000 members. The party promises to spend £50 billion to end unemployment, while income tax would rise to 80% for top earners, letting the lower paid benefit.
There would be no payment whatsoever of any tax from anyone who earns or receives less than £10,000 a year. Now that is a revolutionary tax policy.
Sir James Goldsmith launched his national election campaign this morning. There's no manifesto for the Referendum Party. Its 550 candidates will merely call for a referendum on whether there should be further European integration or a retreat to a free trade area.
Can't quite read it, Sir James.
Yeah, Sir James chose what he hoped would be fertile territory for his campaign, the fishing port of Newlyn in Cornwall. The party's yellow flag already flies from countless masts.
A lot of people in the southwest have had their livelihoods drastically affected for the worse by the European Union, especially the fishermen and also the farmers as well. So it's a crucial issue, and the issue of Europe must be at the top of the election.
Sir James held his inaugural press conference processing through the town. In his most outspoken comments since the launch of his party, he abandoned any pretense of neutrality. Federal Europe was a disaster, he said. And he warned his audience of fishermen that national fishing fleets would soon disappear.
There will be a European Union fleet in 5 years' time. And to be able to go out there and fish, you're going to need a special fishing permit from a gruesome, unelected bureaucrat in Brussels.
And he accused the main parties of lying about European fishing policy and said they were trying to stifle the debate on Europe. It must be the spin doctor's nightmare, the boss running out of control. This morning there was a rare public glimpse of Labour's media maestros tweaking the wires without obvious effect, though when the press conference began with its usual happy song, there was no hint of the coming ordeal.
Thank you very much for coming this morning.
Gordon Brown is famous for his interest in his subject. Soon he was well stuck into the economics of unemployment. Time passed. Communications Director Peter Mandelson and Charlie Whelan, Gordon Brown's press spokesman, start some time to wrap up body language.
Tony and then George.
Charlie Whelan becomes more direct. 2 more questions, he signals.
Robert Peston. Nick. Vincent. I'll take one further question. Eleanor Goodwin. And that is how a Labour Chancellor will proceed. Thank you very much.
Just 22 press conferences till polling day. That's it from us. Back to you now in the studio, Peter.
And Perkins. Today's Church report, which describes the benefit system as humiliating, highlights one of the main policy dilemmas facing all 3 party leaders this campaign. How to contain the huge social security bill when dependence on welfare is increasing. Labour have promised to get 250,000 young people off benefit and into work, paid for by a windfall tax on the privatised utilities. They'll review the state pension system. Britain's elderly population is growing fast. Labour also want a royal commission on how to pay for long-term care for the elderly, and they have plans to get lone parents back to work. The Conservatives already launched pilot schemes in workfare to get the long-term unemployed off benefit. They've also proposed a radical reform of pensions, with a new generation of young people building up their own pension funds. They want private insurance for long-term care. In return, the state would allow those in care to keep more of their assets. And the Tories would phase out special benefits for lone parents. The Liberal Democrats propose a voluntary citizen service where the unemployed can learn new skills in voluntary work. Poorer pensioners would see their benefits go up in line with earnings. The Liberal Democrats will allow elderly people in long-term care to keep more of their assets, and they're committed to reversing some of the benefit cuts made by the Conservatives. Our Social Affairs editor Neil Dixon reports from one of the poorest areas of Britain, the East End of London, on policy and the welfare state.
Tom is going home. In a society of haves, he is one of the have-nots. Now in his 70s, he's been on the street since the modern social security system was born more than 50 years ago. Today he keeps going, supported by state benefits and charity. It's hardly the image the founding fathers of modern welfare envisaged.
If the founders of the welfare will see me sitting here now, the son of the bloody Grail.
You alright? Yeah, come back. Do you want some food?
Charities have been dishing out sustenance to the East End poor for more than 100 years. At the drop-in centre in St Botolph's Crypt, the homeless, the mentally ill and the physically disabled come for food and warmth. Surprisingly, there's little resentment here about a welfare state which has already become tougher and looks likely to become tougher still, whoever wins the election.
It's taxpayers' money. I mean, there's a lot of people that are on benefit that don't deserve to be on benefit. And you got all the fraud, all the people claiming in 6 or 7 different names. No, I think it's good that they're making it tougher. Make it as tough as they can.
It's as if there's acceptance that the state cannot or will not provide everything they need, and that voluntary centres like this one will always be a lifeline.
If I couldn't come to these places and have the compassion of these people to give me their time, help, sympathy and comfort, I would be less than a dead dog on the street today.
We may allow ourselves a brief period of rejoicing.
It's a long way from the optimism in the aftermath of war, when the foundations of the modern welfare state were built. That was a world of low unemployment, stable families and a relatively small elderly population. Today that world has gone. More families than ever depend on welfare. When the Conservatives came to power in 1979, there were 300,000 lone parents on benefit like Julie. Now there are 1 million more. With 5 children from 3 fathers, she's the type of mother some are quick to condemn. The main parties may agree that 2 parents are generally better than 1, but the Conservatives are committed to phasing out the extra benefits now paid to lone parents. Labour and the Liberal Democrats haven't said what they'll do. And while all the politicians have ideas for helping lone parents back to work, Julie claims for her a job is out of the question.
There's no way I'm going to be able to go out to work and say be the man in the house, because I have to be the mother and the father. So I'm cleaning and cooking and looking after the kids like the mother all day. I could work all evening, but then I've still got to pay childminders to mind the children.
For all the main parties, helping people get back to work is seen as a key welfare reform. Labour plans to devote the proceeds from its windfall tax to a massive programme of retraining. The Conservatives are already experimenting with workfare, whereby benefit is only paid in return for some form of community employment. The Liberal Democrats, meanwhile, promise changes to the tax and benefit system to remove disincentives to work. Another estate, another problem. Most of the politicians' plans are aimed at young people like Stefan and Linda. They're one of thousands of no-income families. Neither of them work, their parents and their siblings are all on benefit. Stefan is 18, but he's illiterate, and it will take more than a few courses to make him employable.
I went on to a course with painting and decorating,
and they still said that they need people who can read and write. I can work, but there's nothing out there for me.
Do you think that politicians and people like that really understand people like you?
No, I don't think they do. Because if they understood what we have to go everyday life, then they'd realise that they can't deduct money, and they need to put it up a bit more. And if they went to the schools and see the everyday life and the way people live these days, then they wouldn't believe it really.
It's a sense of exclusion shared by these Asian elders. At this voluntary day centre they come for mutual support. They were promised security in retirement. Now they say their housing is poor and that welfare services ignore their needs. An age-concerned researcher has come to listen to their grievances.
They are thinking that this is a sort of game being played here, but the country is saying that this is a welfare state. It's not welfare state-like. It could be happened in some other countries which are not. He mentioned it could be happened in Bangladesh.
Over the last 18 years, the Conservatives have increased payments to poorer old people, but they've also cut the link between benefits and earnings. In past elections, Labour promised to reverse that, but not this time. As the rest of society becomes richer, there's no guarantee the poor will keep up, although the Liberal Democrats say they'll restore the earnings link for low-income pensioners. And with social services such as Meals on Wheels under threat from local authority cuts, many older people like Rose Gowler fear the welfare state they helped to build may not survive. She retains her independence with the support of her family, the NHS and social services. But with all the politicians talking more about private provision and individual contributions, she is concerned about the future.
We are not too bad off. The education that my children have had both went to university. I mean, when I was young, this was absolutely out of the question for the working class. But what's going to happen to my grandchildren and my great-grandson? I can't really contemplate.
Old welfare seems to have had its day. Whoever wins the election will try to cut the social security budget and encourage more of us to look after ourselves. Self-reliance rather than mutual dependence will become the order of the new millennium. The question remains whether this new era will bridge the gap between the haves and have-nots, between Stefan and his kind and the high-tech icons of the city that for him remain part of a remote and alien world. Neil Dixon, BBC News, in London's East End.
And if you'd like to see more details on the party's policies on welfare and jobs, you can turn to our election fact file on page 130 on CFAX after this news. The main election headline again. Since we've been on the air, Neil Hamilton has been adopted as Conservative candidate for Tatton. We're joined again from Tatton by our political correspondent Nicholas Jones. Nick, remind us of how the meeting divided.
Well, there were 282 party members at this meeting, and 182 voted for Neil Hamilton for his re-selection. He failed to get the support of 100 of the members who were here, and 35 of them actually voted against Mr. Hamilton. The other 65 abstained. So you can see it was a resounding victory for Neil Hamilton. He's been safely re-selected as the candidate.
Any clues as to the mood of the meeting and the sentiments expressed?
Yes, a number of those who've come out, this is the people who were critical of Mr. Hamilton, said it was a bad-tempered meeting, that they were heckled, that when they tried to get a secret ballot, they were hissed. And a number of the people who've come out, these are the disaffected members of the association, have warned that it could well lead to the standing or the finding of an independent Conservative candidate to stand against Mr. Hamilton.
Would you say that the candidacy of Martin Bell hardened support for Neil Hamilton?
I think it has, yes. As for Martin Bell himself, he's making it very clear this evening that he feels fired up now by the decision of this local party here tonight, that he's determined, he says, to take Neil Hamilton all the way, and that he is going to fight partly on the corruption ticket, the anti-corruption ticket. He says he's not going to rake over some of those allegations which are still unresolved, but he certainly is going to make the point that he's standing for trust and that he believes there are allegations against Mr. Hamilton of corruption, and he thinks those should be considered by the voters. And Mr. Bell has gone as far as to say he thinks that he could actually win this seat and become the MP here for the next 3 or 4 years.
Nicholas Jones in Tatton, thank you. And I'm joined now by our political editor, Robin Oakley. Robin, John Major needs this like a hole in the head.
Oh, absolutely. He must have had his fingers crossed that Mr. Hamilton would go down tonight, because now Mr. Hamilton is the candidate, Martin Bell is standing against him. The whole anti-corruption sleaze issue will continue to dog the Tories in this campaign. And of course the opposition parties will pile in and attempt to make it a leadership issue too. We've already had John Prescott tonight greeting this result by saying that the Tory party campaign will be mired in corruption, and that nobody doubts that had Mr. Blair had an MP with these kind of problems, allegations hanging over him in the Labour Party, he would have been out, he would not have been fighting, it would have been a leadership decision and it would have been stopped. So Mr. Major is going to have real problems on this. He was pretty ratty when he was asked about it at a press conference in Birmingham this morning, said he wasn't going to have this election campaign dominated by one constituency, but that's a danger he now faces.
Can Martin Bell win? After all, he may find it difficult to remain his own man, with Labour and the Liberal Democrats presumably out on the streets rooting for him.
Well, there's obviously a mathematical possibility that he can win. I mean, the notional votes at the last election, because this is a redistributed constituency, but as far as the psephologists can work it out, there would have been 32,000 Tory votes in this constituency last time round, about 19,000 votes between them for Labour and Liberal Democrats, calculated on this notional basis. So that leaves a majority, notional majority, around about 13,000. You require 6,500 Tories, disillusioned Tories, upset by Mr. Hamilton in a divided constituency association, to vote against their own party. Well, that's perfectly possible with the kind of media interest that there's going to continue to be in this campaign, and one could see people being drafted in to work for Martin Bell, and the whole thing remaining very high focus.
Just a quick one. Can you think of anything that Conservatives can do to refocus the campaign and prevent the rest of the 2.5 weeks being spent in Tatton?
All they can do is to continue to focus, as they've tried to do already, on the economy. There has been some sign that the underlying poll figures in terms of economic competence and so on are showing through a little more support for the Conservatives in terms of their perceived ability to run the economy. That's the only thing they can do. They've got to get the concentration on the economy and off side issues like sleaze if they're going to be able to turn that corner and make the breakthrough in the polls which has so far eluded them.